Under Ambassador Blackwell's direction, we wrote the earliest cables that began advocating for such a deal, going back to 2001. And in 2002, 2003, we engaged in some of the most difficult bureaucratic infighting within the State Department, trying to get people to appreciate the importance of such a deal.
But it did not get much traction until Bush's re-election in 2004. Early in his second term, India's new government, led by the Congress Party, broached the idea again. Publicly, India said it needs nuclear power because of its growing energy needs. And this time around, the Americans were prepared to entertain an unprecedented deal.
And I think once people began to appreciate that this would in fact be an enormous contribution to India's national growth, that I think the idea started to grow roots, as it were, in the U.S. system.
I was at the State Department in part of the Colin Powell period, and there was an effort to seek ways of moving ahead with India that wouldn't violate or really require a fundamental revision of either international architecture or U.S. national law. And we were moving ahead with that, but in a kind of a slow and deliberative fashion. And it was only when Secretary Rice came over to the State Department that the desire was made clear to essentially push forward all engines 110% and get something through.
During a visit to New Delhi in March 2005, Rice conveyed the U.S. decision to move forward with the nuclear deal.
It was an earthquake in international diplomacy. It was a fundamental turning point in the U.S.-India relationship.
3 months later in Washington, on July 18, Prime Minister Singh and President Bush announced that the two nations would work toward a civilian nuclear deal. That ended a disagreement that dated back more than 40 years. Once the decision to go ahead with the deal was reached, both governments focused their attention on selling it to their public and elected representatives. Both said nuclear energy is clean, and expanding India's atomic energy production would help fight global warming. The Bush administration also argued that bringing India into the nuclear mainstream would make the world a safer place. In the meantime, many supporters touted other potential benefits the deal offered, such as winning a crucial ally in a strategically important region and increased business opportunities.
Why India? Because of the growing importance of India in a critical part of the world.
New Jersey Democrat Frank Pallone is said to represent more Indian Americans than any other congressman. He was among those who argued that the deal would advance U.S. interest in Asia.
There's always a tremendous suspicion of China on the part of America because it continues to be a communist dictatorship and violates human rights. I mean, there are always incidents involving China which are not favorable to U.S.-China relations. And then on the other side of India, you have the Mideast, which continues to be in turmoil. I mean, India is, sort of a sea of peace.
So it's really quite important for us to work with India, and we have been incrementally doing so since the beginning of this century in terms of joint military exercises, the sale of military equipment to India, and there has been active Indian support for the global war on terrorism besides.
India is a growing market. India is a democracy. And India is like the United States, more so than probably any other country in, okay, maybe Japan and a few others, but there aren't too many that share our values.
Opponents of the agreement say the idea of using India as a bulwark against China is plain ridiculous.
And I think this is a naive notion. India is a proud post-colonial country. It's very large. It doesn't want to, and it's not going to do things vis-a-vis China just because Washington wants it to. It needs to maintain a good relationship with China.
One group that was lobbying for the deal publicly and privately was the U.S. business community. The agreement is expected to generate business worth $150 billion. With its economy growing faster than any country's except China, India's energy needs are set to increase exponentially. country currently ranks 5th in energy consumption. And at the moment, nuclear plants supply only 3% of electricity in India. Nuclear power is expected to touch 25% in the next 3 decades. Some experts see India building as many as 40 nuclear plants in the next 25 years. Of course, the US nuclear industry, which hasn't built any new reactors since the 1970s, wants to cash in on it.
US will get a large chunk. I mean, that's what the presumption on which people are operating right now, that they will get a large chunk of the business just because our bilateral relations are so good.
The agreement is also expected to become a boon to other US industries such as the defense and aerospace.
India is an expansion of both its Navy and its Air Force. Some people are predicting that in the next 5-10 years, India will be spending $60 billion, much of that for imports. And of course, American companies, which have some of the best equipment in the world, are pushing for their exports.
But administration officials continue to insist that the primary reason the United States went for the deal was to strengthen bilateral ties.
You know, some people said it was because of China, other people said that it was because we wanted to strengthen the non-proliferation regime. A third group said, oh, you know, they are exploiting economic opportunities. And there may be an element of some truth to each of these, but I think they were not really central. The central objective was simply put the relationship on the right track, and that meant getting rid of an old problem.
The nuclear agreement ran into political opposition in both countries. In New Delhi, 2 main left parties opposed any deal with the United States on the grounds that it would weaken India's sovereignty. Even the main opposition party, the BJP, turned against the deal, even though it pursued the agreement while in power.
When you make a monumental change in international diplomacy, when you, in essence, overturn the conventional wisdom of a generation, then of course you expect that there'll be opposition on both sides. We were met with a fusillade of criticism from our own non-proliferation community here in the United States, and especially in Washington, D.C., and also from some members of Congress.
In India, the opposition was political. In the US, the criticism was mostly over the non-proliferation issue.
The most important impediment was the fear that this deal would unravel the entire global non-proliferation order, which we spent several decades constructing. And this was not an illegitimate fear. It was a very legitimate concern.
India has had a good non-proliferation record with respect to the transfer of nuclear items to other countries. But with respect to its own nuclear weapons development, it has had a very checkered history. The Indian government has not, in our view, committed to the same nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament commitments and obligations that other advanced nuclear weapon states have committed to.
Kimball and other non-proliferation activists argued that the treaty would undermine the NPT.
The problem really is going to be that this could change the calculations of Iranian leaders and other members of the NPT who are thinking about pursuing enrichment and reprocessing technology, and who may even be thinking about pursuing the option of nuclear weapons, other states in the Middle East, for instance. And I think what is likely to happen is they're going to see this and they're going to be less committed to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and less committed to enforcing compliance with the NPT.
There was also concern that the treaty could lead to a regional arms race.
I think we have encouraged vertical proliferation in Southern Asia, which is not a good idea. And Pakistan is in the process of building 2 new plutonium production reactors instead of building more electricity for its people. Pakistan seems intent to match India, compete with India in the nuclear field, military nuclear field. China's involved with this. China's nuclear capacity is growing. I don't see how this is a